Welcome to Curito Connects. I'm your host, Jenn, and I've been conversing with friends around the world about life challenges and impactful moments. Conversations on this platform look at answering the questions, how we overcome challenges and how our experiences shape who we are and the work we do today. I hope this work can inspire you on your own personal and individual journey. Let's dive right in. Hello, my guest today is Melina Shannon-DiPietro, the Executive Director of MAD, Danish for Food, the nonprofit organization founded by René Redzepi of restaurant Noma. MAD inspires and empowers cooks, servers, and eaters to create sustainable change through education programs and publications. Hi, Melina.
Hi, Jenn. It's great to be here with you.
I'm super excited to be able to converse with you today about creating your home, which we'll go into in this conversation. And just a fun fact for our listeners, I met Melina earlier this summer when I did visit her at MAD in Copenhagen and admired your story of how an American girl uprooted herself to Copenhagen and pioneered this amazing venture with Chef René and the Noma team. And found love and stayed. So, Melina, I'm going to leave it there and then have you introduce yourself to our audience, and then we can dive into this whole conversation about creating your home.
Oh, thank you, Jenn. I'm really glad to be able to talk with you and to be able to reflect on some of this today. As you said, I'm American. I grew up in Albany, New York. Albany's a city, when I was growing up, it was a city of about 300,000. And, you know, I was a Northeast-based person, always thinking about food and community, and was fortunate enough while I was working at the High Line in New York City to meet René Redzepi and the team at restaurant Noma and begin dreaming with them about a project in Copenhagen. So that was the very beginning of my journey here. I can tell you more about that.
So when you grew up in Albany, was food a big part of your growing up? Like, you know, in terms of your family, your parents, were you guys in the food industry, or what was it about food that you can remember from your early days that you were so passionate about? Or did you grow up on a farm, or, you know?
Great questions. So absolutely, yes. So on my mom's side, my mom had grown up in the States and I think ate too many like roots, potatoes, and elbow macaroni in 1950s Northeast USA. And my dad grew up, was born in Sicily, and then his family emigrated to the US in 1956. And we lived next door to my dad's parents. And so in many ways, I grew up, you know, in a very traditional household. My Sicilian grandmother was the person who provided my daycare every day. But in their backyard, it was rich and abundant with pear and apple trees, with a garden they tended. And that was the place we spent time together. My mom and grandmother would also, you know, I think in a probably very traditional way, the women had responsibility for procuring and preparing food. And my mom and grandmother and aunt would sometimes pull us out of school so we could go harvest fruit, it would be strawberries, blueberries, cherries, then tomatoes from farms in the Catskill region outside of Albany, New York. And that became our food for winter. So we were freezing or canning that fruit. There would be always in September, which was sort of the end of harvest, tomato harvest in that region. There'd be 2 days where the entire family was together to can tomato sauce outdoors. So there would be bushels and bushels of tomatoes, and my grandfather tending 2 fires, and my uncles yelling about what needed to be done and cranking the tomato sauce machine. And that was the place we grew up. And my mom, in part because she had grown up in a home where food was about just getting fueled and not about flavor, she also had a really keen sense for flavor and for nutrition. So
Wow.
that was like the ground level of like the foundational piece of growing up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, do you do that with your kids now? And what you just described, to be able to get pulled out of school to do that, probably at the time for you guys as kids was like, oh my God, like labor
So
ward. So
embarrassing.
embarrassing. Like, I have to skip school and I have to say I went to go strawberry picking. But it's like a privilege now to be able to do that, right? Because we're so disconnected from that, especially for kids who grew up in cities. So I feel like that's such a powerful messaging too, in terms of your relationship with food. And
Yeah. My sister and I joke regularly about how the things that we thought were torture when we were kids keep becoming cool, right? Like backyard gardens, mason jars. Um, and then I think, some of my work is certainly both when I worked at Yale University, starting up a college farm for students to work on there, and now at MAD, where we have our Vilmel program. So Vilmel means wild food. And there, what we're doing is taking people out into the natural landscape to learn what's edible. But, those parts, I think much of my career comes from this early sense that nature is incredibly important and transformative, and that our most everyday connection to the environment is through food, and that it provides joy, it provides community, and a lot of the world doesn't have that right now. A lot of the world does, and we should help protect that and nurture that. But then for the spots where it's missing, let's start recreating it, because I think it
yeah.
holds so much promise for the future.
So just a little side add on to that
Mhm.
narrative. When you were growing up and in school, did you kind of always know you wanted to do work in this area? Like, were you like, oh, I want to be a chef one day, or I want to just live on a farm and cultivate food, or
Yeah.
do like food science or something? I don't know. Like, or did you want to be a dancer? I don't know.
I still want to be a dancer. I still want to have enough rhythm to dance. No, I would say, I have always had an interest in this space, but I didn't have clarity about what the specifics of the day to day would look like. So, in school, I studied a mix of political science and history. In the maybe 5 or 10 years until my early 30s, I felt pretty torn about whether I would, the way I framed it to myself then was I going to work in a big organization and have an impact, or was I going to go have a farm and live my dream life? And after some time, you realize that it's not that polar, right? There are many phases of life and also many ways to live. So I've also, I've spent time working in New York City and making green public space and delicious food available through the Highline Park. I don't think one needs to have a master plan for life. I think actually we need to very take the time and give ourselves the space to focus in on these moments of transition. I think it's people sometimes try. I think I tried, even when I met René and the team here, sometimes try to ignore when opportunity is calling you, right? I met them, they were doing fascinating work, and I was like, I am not moving to Copenhagen. Denmark is not on my radar. I had just finished my job at the Highline, was really excited for a next phase. I imagined that being in Washington, D.C., and about setting up a house there and living close to my friends and to my brother and his wife and their baby. And somehow Copenhagen intervened. And I think you have to pay attention to those signals when they come up. And they're different for everyone, of course. But yeah, they're important.
Oh, I
More
love
important than
that.
the master plan. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, master plan. But the funny thing that you just said earlier, which I thought was so great, when you said, yeah, I thought maybe, do I want to work for big corporate, or do I want to just, live on a farm and work on that? And I mean, like, your Highline project was a merge of the two, let
Mhm.
alone the next thing. And so coming back to our theme of, creating your home, and then obviously the theme of this podcast, what for you was the challenge or the impactful moment for you, like as in that switch where you took a shift
Yeah.
and then fell into this very passionate line of work you're doing and creating, which I think is amazing. And we can go into that whole other topic another time. But
Yeah. So I think in terms of if the shift moment was saying yes to the opportunity to come here, I had actually said no once, right? I had said, no, I'm not interested in moving. And uh, René is persistent, thank goodness. And he asked me to work on a freelance project. So I was working on that freelance project from my very new apartment in Washington, D.C., and discovering that the conversations I had at 6 a.m. East Coast time to plan this first leadership program that he had dreamed up for people working in the restaurant world were the most interesting professional conversations of my day. They were the ones that left me feeling inspired. They were the ones that left me thinking. It was where my mind kept returning. And so we had this project we were working on, and that was a week-long project with Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. And we were bringing 9 chefs to the university, which felt very new and radical then, right? To say, like, people who are doing the work of craft, the work of cooking, also have a place at a university, and that there can be a really powerful exchange between faculty, between students, and between people working. That week was fantastic. And over the course of that week, I got to know René better. I got to see the impact of our work. I got to hear from people working in restaurants at a really high level of sophistication what the challenges were in the field. And so much of that lined up with the issues that were important to me, right? It was, how do we lead our teams better? How do we take good care of ourselves as leaders and managers and our teams? How do we take care of our communities? And how do we take care of the environment? And I began also to learn in that week that the thing that motivated this guy, René Redzepi, who was known for being, the number one, known for creating the number one restaurant in the world many times over, was not elitism or fanciness or exclusivity. It was curiosity and community and knowledge. And for me to understand that his goal was to give back broadly to the restaurant industry, broadly to the world through MAD, that was the thing that made the difference. Maybe also that I was a little bored in my other job, but that was the thing that made the difference. I could see where those ambitions aligned with my own values. Yeah.
so that was when it was like that switch turned on for you, and you're like, okay, maybe I'll say yes.
Yes. And, I had 2 great friends who I was spending time talking with this. I think, having friends for me, this was 2 women who knew me well and who had seen me through, seen me through many
Ups and downs.
years of adulthood. Yeah, ups and downs. Thank you. They were both saying, you want to take this. Like, you'll regret this if you don't take it. And so we created a sort of crazy deal. I said, okay, I'll come live in Copenhagen for 4 months and we'll try it out. And and I had this vision that I would go back and forth from the US to Denmark. And I very quickly learned you can't build an organization that way. But creating that baby step, right? Or that boundary, like I could imagine a 4-month chunk, and saying yes to that was a really important way to jump in. Yeah.
It's like meeting you in the middle, because it's like that commitment, but then like being able to say, well, maybe not after seeing how it worked out, right? So what was I mean, I'm assuming, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that processing obviously was also scary, right? Because you're like, I'm leaving everything I know, which is so comfy for me as home, because your family, your close friends, what you know is on the East Coast in the US, to be invited by, like you said, this very renowned chef, which at the time when you met him at the Highline, you already knew who he was? Yeah, like, or kind of, because I almost feel like if fast forward today and you didn't have this relationship with him, but we all know who he is, right? And then he was to invite you, would you have said yes on the spot, or you would still have been like twiddling your thumb, going, I don't know, is this some, not that he's like this, but just like you were saying, stereotyping, like, is he some big ego chef who just wants to build something and is just saying things but not really able to execute, some of these thoughts that a lot of times we do have, right?
Well, I think for me, I was not paying attention to fine dining before
Meeting him.
2015, 2016, right? So the pieces of food and work in food that felt really important to me were the everydayness of it, right? The work that it takes on a farm, the type of environment it takes on a farm to produce high quality food, what high quality agriculture means for taste, for nutrition, for carbon sequestration. And then when I was at the Highline, I translated that into how can restaurants and small concessions, an ice cream shop, a coffee shop, a place where you can get a good beer with good service, how does that help build community? How does that help bring us together as people? And so I think paying attention to another level of restaurants beyond the college dining halls I had worked with at Yale and the everyday but delicious restaurants and spaces that I was creating at the Highline for our visitors to the park. But the high-end dining was a new area to me, and watching the skill and the tenacity and determination within this field has been incredible to see. And I would say these people are performing at the level of, Olympic or world-class athletes every day of the year.
Yeah.
And as I've come to understand that, I also see, okay, right, we need to provide a new set of tools to work in this environment. And that's part of the work we're doing at MAD.
So for you, when you think about that time of then really picking up and coming all the way out to Copenhagen, how did you adjust your mindset of calling it home, right? Because I'm assuming, again, that like part of you was like, okay, I'll be here for a year. And then, maybe like René will let me extend this project to the US so then I can go back to the States, right? Like it's kind of like tippy-toeing your way around it, because personally, you probably also wanted, again, to be near home. But how did you, and I don't know at the time if you were single or seeing somebody, but I guess the conversation of, beside the professional side of things, the personal side of things, right? I mean, for I think maybe some who are listening, not to say it's a career change, but to go to the unknown, right? And pick up and move and, be like, wow, this person actually sees my talent and wants to build something with me. And I'm an asset to this as well. And how can you, go to a foreign country, they all speak English there. But of course, like we talked about before we start recording, when you're in a foreign country with a different language, sometimes that could be a personal barrier, in terms of making social friends and this and that. And so if you could kind of dive into that area a little bit and share.
Absolutely. It was a big decision. I didn't, or I protected myself from understanding the scale of the decision, right? I said, I'm going for 4 months. I'll be back at Christmas. And of course, I remember this moment when I had been in Copenhagen for 2 weeks and I introduced myself to another American expat really fantastic woman. We're at a restaurant opening, and she worked in the arts. And when I said that my plan was to be there in Denmark through the end of the year, I could see her eyes glaze over. Right? She was just like, okay, this person does not, I don't need to spend time on this person. They're not going to be my real friend. And it was just like this moment that stuck with me as the work became more and more interesting. So I was on my own when I moved. That meant in the first months, first years actually, I spent a ton of time on work, right? Probably too many hours on work. And it was satisfying. And in some ways, it was often what the organization needed at that stage in its life cycle to get off the ground. You mentioned the unknown, which I think is such a great concept. I think the unknown is one of the places growth happens. And we often need to step into the unknown to grow. And comfort is really nice, right? The comfort of every day, the comfort of your favorite coffee shop, the comfort of the same colleagues. But I think it's important every now and then in big or small ways to challenge ourselves to step into change. And, in the small things, it can be taking a new way to work every day. It could be, creating a new type of program within your organization. But this was a big change, and I'm glad for it. Yeah.
What did you do to overcome some of those like hesitations or fear? It sounded like you dived into work, so that really took up a lot of your mind space. But you enjoyed it. You were a workaholic, which I think that's a common theme for some people too, right? They just dive completely into work until they burn out. Hopefully that didn't happen for you, but so it's just like for you, or was it meeting your husband that then kind of made you feel like, okay, I'm creating my own home here now, and this is
So there were, I would say, on the front end, right, I created these structures that were like, okay, I'm going to be living in Copenhagen, but I'm going to come back to the US often, right? And so I had this vision, I would be there once a month, spend weeks. That didn't happen. But of course, the visits that I get to do back to the US as part of our work, those are really important to me and really nourishing to me. I think that, the deep sense of home began, it takes a couple of years. I feel like when you're an expat settling in, there's all these layers. For me, it was like first 6 months, so exciting to be living abroad, so exciting to do this new work and to try to understand the opportunities and what we wanted to create, because we didn't have a vision yet. We knew these major themes of curiosity, of making a positive difference, of knowledge, but we didn't know what the programs would be or where the focus would be in the way we now know today at MAD and in our academy programs. But those first 6 months were so exciting. And then you hit 6 months, and at least for me, I felt like, oh, now I understand. I'm starting to understand Danes are different than Americans, but that difference had been hidden from me because everyone's fluent in English and because I was in an expat community. And then, I was like, okay, I need to start building a community that's beyond the people who I'm working with every day. And so I started to invest time in that and to go to yoga and get an exercise routine and go see things outside of the city center in Copenhagen. And I remember the spring of 2018 because it was my birthday. So at that point, I'd been there a year and a half and looked around the table, had those two really good friends who had advised me when I was accepting the job. They had come to visit, but they were there with a group of people who were, still are my friends here. And I thought, okay, it's coming together. And I think that felt like a really strong, positive moment. And I met my partner not until nearly the beginning of Corona. And that was a whole nother level of settling in, right? On one hand, Corona grounded me, right? It said, and the world. So it meant a lot of focus on what was happening with restaurants globally via phone and via Zoom, but physically we weren't traveling, right? In the year previous, I had been in Beijing and Sao Paulo and Los Angeles, New York, Paris, right?
Wow.
Like lots and lots of traveling. But to be fully grounded in Denmark and to make weekends and vacations here, and my partner came with 3 children. So also to get to begin to know them as they were quarantined home from school. But it was a big time and fantastic. Uh, yeah, yeah.
That's a whole other learning curve there, right? To have the kids in, I mean, yeah, those the stories we've heard of the Corona pandemic lockdown days with whole families and their kids working online, managing the kids, everything just all in one space.
Denmark was very, very fortunate. Danes are they're really good at following guidelines. They're very yeah. So the minute the Danish prime minister said, you should probably stop seeing more than 10 people at a time, right? That was the first round of
Yeah.
recommendations. Everyone just stopped seeing anyone outside the people they lived with, pretty much. And it was so interesting to watch that. But it also meant along the path later on, our schools were closed very few weeks, workplaces were closed very few weeks. So we were fortunate in that way. Though of course we were grounded for travel, and I think that phase was quite important for me
Yeah.
continuing to put roots down here. Yeah.
So roots are down now. They're there.
Roots are down. We got a greenhouse so that I could have I have a bit of a garden in the field here outside of our house, but then the greenhouse is so I can grow really excellent tomatoes. When you were here, Jenn, I looked. It was early August or middle of August, August 17th, and then we had every day. It was like 16 hours of daylight, 16 hours between sunrise and sunset. And now we're at the exact opposite of that moment. It's 8 hours of sun between sunrise and sunset, and still getting tinier and tinier that window. But if you want to grow great tomatoes in Denmark, a greenhouse is essential. So yeah, roots are
Ah.
down when we put that foundation for the greenhouse in. Yeah.
Awesome. So, how would you define like creating your home in this
Mm,
conversation? Like for obviously for you, it was very grounded back in the US, as you described earlier in the conversation, and then taking that leap of faith and accepting Renee's offer to move to Copenhagen and then kind of checking, testing the waters out. And then I guess to your point, you said earlier, thanks to COVID, it really
yeah.
grounded you because otherwise, without COVID, and I think for many people, it was the same thing. A lot of business travelers too. Once that traveling was taken away from the equation, everyone stayed put. And though we might not reflect on it, there is a lot of beauty to that as well.
Mm,
Really staying put within your environment and not like picking up and traveling every few weeks.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Being forced into some of the very known, right? Um, for me, creating home, I like that you talk about it in that way because it also helps me step back and think, okay, what are the elements in every phase of my life that have been about creating home, right? And some of the pieces that provide continuity and really are quite satisfying to me and are the things that when I'm feeling down or need a lift are the things I go to, right? Because I think that's some of what home is. Of course, it's we want the people around us who love us and who support us and who we love and support. And I want everyone to have those people all the time, but there are phases of life where we don't. And I think for me, in both in those gaps, also doing small things that make a place feel like home are really important. When I was in New York, when I was in DC, when I was living in the city center in Copenhagen, being able to go to market and get a bouquet of flowers or one stem from, one poppy from a great farmer, and then have that beauty in my room. Being able to go find some beautiful vegetables and cook a meal, to be able to invite some people over to share that meal, even if it's really simple. Those are the things that for me create home in a really significant way. And at the same time, the other piece that creates home for me is about being outside of that physical space, right? It's about knowing which coffee shop I go to, where, you show up often enough and they recognize you. It's realizing that I've been at a particular spot for dinner as many weeks as I've lived in Copenhagen, and knowing that like that exchange at a great wine bar or a simple bistro, that these restaurant and food spaces help create home and community in another way. That's really important. I think that's another piece of creating home for me.
I love how you described that, because that feels like what keeps you grounded too, which is usually also like a question I ask my guests, like, what do you do that keeps you grounded? And it sounds like these little rituals and these little habits that you have is what keeps you grounded, regardless of where you are physically at. So that's, that works for you. And I think obviously there are some listeners who might resonate with that messaging as well. So we're coming short on time. I'm like being mindful of our time that we have here. So I usually ask my guests there's a few questions and you can pick and choose which one or however you want to answer. One starts off with, what would you tell your younger self that what you know now? Yeah. Or you can switch that to kind of like, what would you tell the listeners who are listening to this particular conversation who, resonate with your storyline? Like what messaging would you give them? And then another question usually is like, what books or podcasts, or, it could be even like a practice you have or mentors that have kind of been grounding for you through the years whenever you come into these different obstacles or challenges or, etc., that you would recommend to other people that has helped you.
Nice.
So sorry. Sorry. How I usually kind of wrap this up.
Really good questions. So I think in terms of what I would advise my younger self, or what I would say to people in moments of transition, is like there are two ways, it seems to me, that we end up making decisions. We can make decisions for something we love and want, or we can make decisions away from something because it doesn't feel good to us. It feels fearful. It feels negative. It drains our energy. And we're all our own best monitors of that. But I think, the more one can make decisions towards joy and not because you're prompted by fear, the better. It's an imperfect system. I'm not advocating abandoning job, bank account, home. I'm saying pay attention and, go ahead and make a plan, based on that ability to navigate where you see joy, and maybe you've been avoiding that,
I like that.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's kind of like easier said than done, right? But it's such a good reminder. And I
Much
think,
easier said than
yeah.
done.
And I think one of the things I often tell other people in side conversations I have, especially when they're like stuck, is like, really just go with what is passionate for you. I know they always say don't mix passion with work, but because it doesn't leave you, like you're still, you might go off and be logical, and still do what logically is supposed to do, the norm of society's expectation. But you're still, at the end of the day, you're going to come back to what was so passionate and joyful, as you said, to you. And it just might take a few years, it might take decades, but you'll find that you come back. So listen to it, like you said. Yeah.
I think that's right. And we tend to know when there's that nagging fear or nagging thing we missed. And at the same time, I think it's okay to mix passion and work. I think it's really important. I think work is one of the ways we give ourselves to the world and to our communities, and it is one of the ways the world gives back to us. I also think, that does not mean every single day, every single minute I am or one is, there are some tasks at work I find boring. That's okay. Right? Work is different than leisure. And I think it's worth remembering that. So I think that's what I would think about in making path for the future, and to not be afraid to try things out, right? We can spend a lot of time paralyzed in the in-between of making decisions, and in the thinking about making decisions, but we get much better data from doing. And that's important to remember. And I think the second piece, what books would I recommend?
Like resources. Yeah.
So I have a meditation practice that's been really important to me. So I learned Vedic meditation a decade ago, and that meditation every single day is incredibly important. The other set of resources for me is a mix of books and people. So at MAD, where we are aiming to transform the restaurant industry, to give people skills and ability to solve problems that haven't previously been built into the industry. The industry's really been over-indexed on craft. Everyone learns how to braise the chicken, or how to make the hollandaise sauce, or how to pour this perfect glass of wine, but they're learning less about the skill of leading or the skill of communication, what it takes to take care of the environment. And so there's a collection of books that we use at our MAD Academy book club. So if you choose to participate, to sign up for 5 days of programming with us, which are deep and immersive and satisfying, like they're made for people in the hospitality industry by people who have worked in hospitality and know the challenges of this field. And so it's a mix of like hands-on case studies and being out and about and really engaged conversation, and then great experts from inside hospitality and outside. But then one of their welcomes, and one of the things that keeps them connected to us for the long term, is this book club. And we have a set of books that each of us has recommended as a team. And then you get a book and then you just keep passing it on, right? The idea is like, don't hold on to that knowledge, share it. And I think I would go back to one of the first books I recommended for that club was The Art of Possibility. And that is just a beautiful book about leadership. It is fundamentally, the basic principle is when people show up, give them an A. Or when you begin to work with someone, give them an A. It's by Ben and Roz Zander. And to look at who people are and what they're doing in a positive light, I think is really powerful. And it changed my management and leadership early on. I think it's also related, it's related to a trend of thinking called appreciative inquiry that we now see being applied to systems, to community development, so I think that's a book I think is timeless and a good one to return to.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, cool. So I will put all the information about MAD and social media stuff and the book and the Vedic meditation information and the episode resources below. And so if anyone who's in the hospitality industry who is curious about MAD, they can reach out or look into it. I think from what I saw, which was just a snippet, I think if I was in the field, I would want to sign up for it. I think it's very helpful in the times we are in right now. So yeah, I thank you so much for your time. Happy holidays to you as well. I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to share before we say farewell.
I was just thinking the other thing that helps make home is chocolate chip cookies. I've started making a lot of chocolate chip cookies, which requires importing good chocolate chips from the US. So I tell people to bring them to me all the time. But I've really appreciated this conversation, Jenn. I think, one of the things we try to do in our programming is give people the time and space to reflect on what's important. And you're clearly doing that with this podcast and giving people space to reflect not only on what's important in the moment, but what's important over a lifetime. And I think it's an incredibly powerful gift to people. So thank you.
Thank you. I will have to ask you a very funny question. Why do you have to bring chocolate from the US? You're in Europe, isn't it?
Okay, so maybe, fair enough.
Like French chocolate.
Fair enough.
I just had to throw that out there because I was like, that's strange.
Okay, yes, I could get Swiss chocolate. Just like the size of chocolate chips to me seems very important within the chocolate chip cookie. So definitely there have been moments in my life where I've made great chocolate chip cookies by, just chopping a bar.
Yes.
And maybe I should revert to that. But I have noticed that Danish supermarkets carry very tiny chocolate chips, which are of not great quality, more sugar than chocolate. And I feel like that's not the right proportion for a satisfying chocolate chip cookie.
Okay, sorry, I know we're ending here, but
I will make you some chocolate chip cookies, clearly.
Okay, but I just have to throw this out here. You have an amazing, you're at MAD, you work closely with René and his team. Can't they make
I want chocolate chip cookies?
Can't they make you amazing chocolate chip? And, I saw the R&D team. That's a really cool kitchen. I'm sure they could create.
I think if I were after, an additional layer of fermentation beyond the first fermentation of the bean into chocolate, maybe they would be interested in this assignment. Yeah. They're doing such great work.
Creatives, they can come up with something to fulfill your needs of chocolate chip. We'll end there.
The R&D team at Noma is phenomenally talented. Yeah. And I'm so glad they've got their Noma projects and are now sharing those flavors with the world. They're really special. So
yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
That's all we have time for today. Thank you for listening to Curito Connects. For more Connects content, collaborations, and discoveries set to inspire you on your own individual journey, please head to our website at www.curito.co. Until next time, stay inspired, and thank you for joining us at Curito Connects.